Alright guys, and here we are for the last chapter, the end of the Cold War, and also the end of the Sec 4, Sec 5 history syllabus. Okay, and so here we are again. Please have your notes, make sure you're gonna sleep, so on and so forth. And now we are going to talk about three different parts of the chapter. Okay, the question is, why did the Cold War end? We know that the Cold War is fought between the USA and the USSR, and therefore the factors that we're going to look at is basically American superiority, okay, the failure of the Soviet system, and finally we are going to look at the trigger factor. That is to say, Gorbachev's reforms. Now, let me explain. We have three things here. We are talking about the end of the Cold War. Okay, so when we're talking about the end of the Cold War here, we know it is an ideological conflict. Okay, and we know that it is about red versus blue. We have the USSR, and we have our friends in the US of A. Okay, and we know that it is a war of ideas. How does the Cold War end? Is when one side defeats the other. Okay, and that is why our first 2 points become about American superiority and the failure of the Soviet system, because when we compare this, then we get USA better than USSR. Okay, which is why the Cold War will end up, because there's no more enemy left to fight. Okay, but at the same time, nations don't just crumble overnight. Humongous political concepts don't just crumble overnight. That is why there is the trigger factor. Okay, imagine it is like a bottle of Coke, right? Where if I have a bottle of Coke, let me draw it. Oh no, this looks more like an amphora of Coke. And I have it, and I shake, and all the gas is going to build up, right? But it hasn't exploded yet. Okay, it will not blow up yet. It's only when I loosen the cap, okay, that is the trigger action that causes the Coke to fall out. And that is the same kind of idea that we're having here about Gorbachev's reforms. We will come back to this Coke bottle analogy later on. Okay, so just some context for the introductory chapter. Okay, this is the USSR, right? I took this image from Wikipedia, okay? But there's so many people, 286 million people, third largest in population, largest country by land area, second largest economy by GDP, right? So that means gross domestic product, all the things that they can produce, okay? It is a nuclear power, it is a territory spanning 11 time zones, right? That is nearly half the world, okay? And if you look at it, how did such a powerful nation crumble? How did it change? Okay, that is the question we are asking. And if you look at this, on Christmas Day in 1991, the image here on the left, this is the Soviet flag. Okay, what we know as the hammer and sickle. And this building here is the Kremlin. And this flag over here is the Russian state flag. So here what we see is that the idea of Soviet Russia, the Soviets, USSR, has become Russia. No more USSR. And that means no more united, republic of communist states. Okay, they are now a sovereign country. All the satellite states, right, on the western border, they are all now their own country. The question becomes, how did that happen? Okay, how did the USSR end? And that is what we are going to be looking at. Okay, long-term factors, short-term factors. Now we must always remember these are the three factors we are looking at, right? 1, 2, and 3. Okay, here when we talk about Gorbachev's rule, we are looking at reforms. How did he reshape the government? Okay, American superiority, we want to talk about two things: economic and military. And if you can guess, if you're going to compare American superiority and the Soviet system, of course we have to look at economic and military as well. Gorbachev's rule, his reforms are largely political as well as economic. So this is the frame that we need to be thinking about. Okay, how does politics, remember the drives economics, okay, which then moves into social. I know my social affects my politics, right? And it affects my people also. Okay, so we need to remember these are the ideas that we need to bear in mind when we're looking at this chapter. Okay, some chronological updates. The last chapter we stopped at was the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? So after that, from 1962 to 1974, we went into this period called détente, right? Which is a French word which basically means there is a cooling of tensions. Things get better, okay? And you can look at it, it is proven from what happens in during this period of time, okay? 1975, the Vietnam War ends, okay? Oops, sorry, there is a typo here. Richard Nixon is the president in 1969-1974. Things get better. So if you look at 1972, these are examples of how the two superpowers cooperated. Please go and read your textbook for this. Okay. And they even cooperated in ending the Vietnam War. Okay. However, after that, tensions sort of rose again. Okay. If we look at the revocation of trade status, that means previously there's this thing called most favored trade status. Okay, which is here. What happens is that means the Soviets were the favorite trade partners of the Americans. But what happens is that there's a revocation, which means a removal. That means they went back and say no more. Okay. Angolan Civil War, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Again, we see all these things. These are military conflicts that come out as a product of the Cold War. Okay, 1983, Ronald Reagan's elected. He is a very confrontational president, which means, as you can imagine, tensions will increase again. Able Archer is a military exercise, which we are going to look at for a useful case study to demonstrate what is happening during the later part of the Cold War. Okay, all this will lead up to 1985, where Gorbachev comes into power. At the very end, 1991, after 6 years, that is when the USSR dissolves. Okay, so we need to understand what is going on here. The Cold War doesn't just happen from 1945 onwards. You must remember this is nearly 50 years of history. There are a lot of pressures and economic forces at work. Okay, so over this period of time, we must think what is happening politically, economically, okay, militarily, okay, and how does it affect all the different actors in the Cold War. Okay, so that is it for the introduction. Think what we have to think about.